Well, welcome to episode 3 of Planorama, the town legal vlog. I'm here with Simon Ricketts and I'm Duncan Field. In the past 2 episodes we've discussed the Liberal Democrats and the Labour manifestos for the general election, and yesterday we had the launch of the Conservative Party manifesto, and Simon, I think you've been looking through that and looking at the planning implications. Is there anything generally for the planning system that we need to be concerned about or looking forward to?
Well, it's interesting that there really is very little about reform of the planning system itself. Perhaps that's because we already know what's in the pipeline in terms of the accelerated planning green or white paper and some of the other changes, but the sorts of things which I expected to see, which weren't in there, were really not just those measures about speeding up the system, but we've had announcements recently about a massive impetus behind the idea of local listing, for example, giving communities the ability to, or encouraging the communities to put forward buildings for local listing. There's nothing about permitted development. The government could have taken its foot off the accelerator, perhaps, in terms of use of permitted development rights, or equally they could have said something as per previous manifestos about the opportunities of using streamlined processes, but they've stepped away from saying anything about any of that. I don't think there's a reference to neighbourhood planning in the document. Plenty of references to communities, but we seem to have moved away from everything being surrounding, neighbourhood planning. The importance of delivery, use it or lose it. Again, we haven't seen anything. So I don't know what you make of that, but perhaps deliberately they've sort of shied away from tinkering with the system, or is talking about what they're already doing.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a little surprising given that we're supposed to be having a white paper published very shortly. The only thing I noticed was 2 very bland statements about making the planning system simpler for the public and small builders, and then amending the planning rules so that infrastructure comes before homes. I'm not quite sure what that means, but perhaps that's coming up in the white paper, I don't know.
I mean, that's for authorities to negotiate as part of their conditions and sexual license agreements.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And obviously one of the issues which most of the parties will agree on is housing. Is there anything different in the Conservative Party manifesto?
Well, first of all, in terms of the overall target, the target is still, the long-term target is still put forward as 300,000 homes a year by the mid-20s. I mean, this new Parliament will run until 2024, and it's interesting that they go on to say there will be at least 1 million homes over the next Parliament. Well, the next Parliament till 2024, I take that to be, a commitment that, stops at anything above 200,000 a year. Probably very pragmatic not to set targets that they won't achieve, but it's not really the scale of ambition that perhaps is needed. And then when we turn to affordable housing, there's this new concept when they talk about more homes to be offered to local families at 1/3 discount to market value, and that these could be used for key workers and their families. I mean, that's another flavour of affordable housing to the many flavours that we've got already.
Yeah. And I noticed that they're still committed to right to buy, unlike both the Lib Dems and Labour.
Yeah, and still we're promised the social housing white paper. We don't know what reforms are going to flow from that.
So infrastructure, energy and climate change, obviously that's been a big feature of the other manifestos. Does it get much attention here?
Yes, although there's more detail to follow in that there's an indication of an additional £100 billion additional infrastructure funding, but when you look at the separate costings document, which is quite short and accompanies the manifesto, that makes clear that the ways in which that money is to be allocated will come through the National Infrastructure strategy, which will be published with the next budget.
Right.
But there are statements about Northern Powerhouse Rail and what's proposed, Midlands Rail Hub, clearly signalling that investment is going to infrastructure, not just in London. In fact, we don't see reference to Crossrail 2, for example, or other London-focused projects. HS2 really not saying a lot, waiting for the outcome of the Oakervie study. Third runway at Heathrow, really, again, sitting on the fence slightly, despite obviously Boris Johnson's previous statements in his previous role.
Stand in front of the bulldozers.
Yeah, well, he's not quite going to stand in front of the bulldozers, we can be sure. But he's saying Heathrow will need to demonstrate that it can meet air quality and noise obligations, and there'll be no public money for the project, but I don't think Heathrow were expecting public money. So.
Yeah. And I noticed in the discussion on climate change a quick-fire commitment on energy, including the sort of 40 gigawatts of offshore by 2030. Carbon capture storage seemed to have made a comeback, and hydrogen production and nuclear,
Right.
which seems to chime with the other parties as well. So I think a lot of the manifesto also is full of spending commitments and so on. Is there anything that looks like it's coming the way of the planning system? Or
Well, there are plenty of commitments which will certainly have an impact on towns and communities, and I've really just started to do the job of checking what are existing commitments and what are new. There's reference to regenerating towns and the Towns Fund directed towards an initial 100 towns, but that's an existing commitment from September. Equally, the Safer Streets Fund that is announced, that was announced back in October. What did seem to me to be new, but put me right, is there's a cultural capital programme of £250 million and a community ownership fund of £150 million, which is to encourage local takeovers of civic organisations or community assets that are under threat. For example, local football clubs, but also pubs and post offices. So, that's quite a reinforcement of the assets of community value mechanisms.
The localism is still alive.
Yes. So they seem to be new announcements. And of course, the potholes announcement, which £500 million a year towards filling in potholes.
So I think probably we could have expected more, given the accelerated planning white paper is in the pipeline and must be very close to production. They obviously take a conscious decision to save as little as possible on that.
Yeah, well, we're looking at this as lawyers. You've got to look at it as within the political game, I suppose. And there's a game plan played here. This is about an incumbent government which needs to increase its majority focused on one thing. There's one 3-word phrase that's used 22 times during the document, and viewers can guess what that might be.
GBD.
Yes, and to the extent that planning is a vote winner, it may be around issues like the green belt, where there are fairly woolly statements about protecting the green belt, the importance of protecting design standard, bringing forward local design standards in line with the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission. But aside from that, I think it's pretty much business as usual.
Great. Okay. Well, that concludes episode 3. Do let us know what you think, and if you have any ideas for future vlogs, please let us know.